Trapped on Rikers. The untold story of America's most notorious jail. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. The island no one escapes. From the air, Rikers Island looks like an industrial scar, a patch of concrete and razor wire floating in the murky East River, just east of LaGuardia Airport. Planes rise above it every minute, carrying passengers toward distant cities. But beneath those flight paths, tens of thousands of people live and die in the shadows, unseen, unheard, forgotten. For most New Yorkers, Rikers isn't a place they think about. It's a name they hear in passing, a punchline, a warning, a news headline. But for those who've entered its gates, it's a world with its own laws, language, and gods. A world where fear is currency and silence is survival. According to New York City Department of Correction records, Rikers Island was never meant to hold this much power. The complex was built in the 1930s on landfill, garbage dumped into the river, compacted into solid ground. It began as a solution to overcrowding in Manhattan's old jails. Over the decades, it grew, cell block by cell block, wing by wing, until it became one of the largest correctional facilities in the Western world. At its peak, it housed more than 15,000 inmates, most of them awaiting trial, not yet convicted of a crime. By law, they were presumed innocent. By reality, they were condemned to survive a place that even hardened convicts feared. Inside the perimeter fences, the air is thick with a smell that never leaves you: bleach, sweat, and despair. Correctional buses rumble down the causeway, carrying men and women in orange jumpsuits who stare out the window at the skyline of a city that has already forgotten them. Each facility within Rikers has its own reputation. The Anna M. Cross Center, infamous for its mental health unit. The Otis Bantam Correctional Center, known for lockdowns and stabbings. And the Robert N. Davern Complex, the so-called youth jail, where teenagers face the same brutality as adults. A 2014 Department of Justice investigation described Rikers as a deeply dysfunctional institution defined by unchecked violence, officer corruption, and systemic neglect. The report detailed a pattern of excessive force so consistent it had become culture. Officers referred to beatings as tune-ups. Assaults between inmates were dismissed as part of jail life. Medical records went missing. Security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. The island wasn't just isolated physically, it was morally quarantined from the rest of New York. One of the many who entered Rikers without a conviction was a young man known here by a composite name, Andre Lewis. According to court filings and public defender interviews, Andre was 19 when he was arrested in Brooklyn for armed robbery, a charge he denied. He couldn't afford bail. So he waited. And like thousands before him, he was sent to Rikers to await trial. What was supposed to be a few weeks turned into months, then years. He entered as a teenager. He would leave as something else entirely. Andre's first memory of Rikers wasn't the bars or the shouts, it was the silence that hit when the bus doors closed behind him. The soundproof air of finality. He was processed, searched, and stripped. A correctional officer handed him a thin blanket and said, "Keep it close. Nights get cold here." Then, almost as an afterthought, added, "Don't talk too much. They'll find your weakness before you do." Andre nodded, though he didn't yet understand. That understanding came quickly. His first cell block was part of the RNDC, a building intended for adolescents but notorious for its violence. The dorm was controlled by the Bloods, one of the most powerful street gangs inside the jail. They ran everything: who got food, who got beat, and who could sleep in peace. The officers knew. Sometimes they even used it. According to federal testimonies from the Nunez v. City of New York case, guards frequently relied on house gangs to enforce order in exchange for favors, extra food, phone time, or the right to roam without restraint. Those inmates became what the population called the program. The program ruled the dorms. On his first night, Andre watched as a new arrival, a thin, quiet kid named Malik, refused to hand over his sneakers. Minutes later, Malik was dragged into the bathroom. The sound that followed wasn't shouting, it was rhythmic, controlled, like work being done. When Malik returned, he was barefoot, his face swollen beyond recognition. No one said a word. The officers outside the gate didn't enter. The cameras on the wall were turned conveniently toward the ceiling. Andre learned his first rule of Rikers that night: no one will save you here. Not the law. Not the guards. Not God. By the end of his first month, Andre knew the structure. Bloods controlled the phones, Crips the laundry. The Trinitarios handled the contraband, smuggled cigarettes, weed, and pills that came in through kitchen workers or corrupt COs. Everything had a price. Everything had a risk. According to New York City Department of Investigation reports, contraband smuggling was so widespread that some correctional officers made more money dealing inside than they did on salary. The corruption wasn't hidden, it was systemic. Officers sell us the same things they search for, Andre later told investigators. It's just about who you pay. Life inside Rikers wasn't measured in days but in incidents. Each week brought new tension: a stabbing, a lockdown, a code blue alarm that sent guards flooding the hallways in riot gear. Andre began keeping track mentally. Week 1, a fight in the yard. Week 3, a shank found under a mattress. Week 5, a suicide attempt in the showers. By week 10, he stopped counting. According to the Marshall Project's analysis of Rikers records, assaults on staff and inmates climbed by more than 60% between 2011 and 2015. Even as the city poured millions into reform programs, violence only got worse. It wasn't just the inmates turning savage. It was the system itself, designed to punish the poor and forget the waiting. One morning, a correctional officer dragged Andre from his bunk. "Intake transfer," the man said. Andre didn't ask where. You don't ask questions on Rikers, you follow orders and stay breathing. He was moved to the Otis Bantam Correctional Center, a building older and darker than his last. The cells were small enough to touch both walls at once. The heat barely worked. The walls were tattooed with graffiti and scripture. And every inmate had eyes that spoke the same language: exhaustion. At night, Andre lay awake listening to the rats scuttle through the pipes and the guards' footsteps echo down the tier. He wondered what was happening in the courtroom, whether his lawyer even remembered his name. He didn't know that his trial had been delayed again. And again. By the time his next hearing came, he'd already spent 21 months in custody, without a conviction. According to court statistics released by the New York State Office of Court Administration, some detainees on Rikers wait years for trial due to backlog, bureaucratic delay, and judicial neglect. One federal monitor called it justice frozen in place. Andre began to feel it, the freeze, the slow erosion of self. He wasn't counting time anymore. Time was counting him. In 2015, word spread through the jail that something big was coming. Reporters, inspectors, and federal monitors were circling like hawks. The city had been sued again. Lawsuits over beatings, neglect, and wrongful deaths piled high. According to the Department of Justice's findings, Rikers' use of excessive force amounted to a pattern of constitutional violations. Inside the walls, those words meant nothing. Outside, they meant change, or the illusion of it. Rumors of reform reached the inmates like echoes through concrete. More cameras. More oversight. More promises. But Andre knew what most of them already believed. No reform could fix what was built on rot. Rikers wasn't a system that failed. It was a system that succeeded at being exactly what it was designed to be: a warehouse for the forgotten. A proving ground for power. A monument to how easy it is to disappear in the name of justice. As the lights dimmed that night, Andre whispered to the man in the next cell, "You ever think they'll close this place?" A pause. Then a quiet laugh. "Close Rikers? Man, they'll close heaven first." Andre lay awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, knowing he was trapped in a place that wasn't just made of walls, it was made of history, money, and indifference. And the longer he stayed, the more he became part of it. The city outside moved on. Politicians promised change, the public forgot, and the ferries kept coming. Each one carried another busload of faces who thought they were just waiting for trial. They didn't know yet that they were really waiting for themselves to disappear. The machine that feeds itself. The first time Andre Lewis realized that Rikers Island wasn't just a jail, but a business, was during lunch. The chow hall smelled of boiled cabbage and rust. Men stood in lines that moved too slow, watched too closely by guards who didn't really care. The trays clattered, the shouting echoed, and every word carried weight, not because of what was said, but because of who said it. A man named Stacks, a self-proclaimed blood lieutenant, moved through the line like he owned it. Everyone made room. His red shoelaces, a quiet symbol in a place that banned colors, marked him as someone who didn't take orders, only gave them. When the kitchen worker handed Stacks an extra slice of bread, Andre noticed the nod between them. A small gesture, but it said everything. Food was currency. Power was traded in favors, smuggled goods, and silence. Later that night, Andre asked his bunkmate, Rico, how a man like Stacks could walk through the jail untouched. Rico smirked. "You think the COs run this place?" "Nah, bro. They rent it from the gangs." It sounded like a joke, but Andre would soon learn it wasn't. According to the New York Times and Department of Investigation reports, the economy inside Rikers runs deeper than most city budget. Contraband, tobacco, weed, phones, even pills, is trafficked through officers, civilian employees, and visitors. In 2017 alone, over 70 correctional officers were arrested for smuggling or corruption-related charges. The city called it a disciplinary problem. Inmates called it business as usual. For every shakedown, there was a replacement shipment the next day. The flow never stopped because too many people, inside and out, benefited from keeping it alive. "Everyone gets paid," Rico explained one night as he whispered through the thin cell wall. "COs get their cuts, lieutenants turn their heads, captains write fake reports, and we get to breathe easy as long as the money moves." Andre listened, trying to understand how something so broken could function so smoothly. That's when Rico said something that stuck with him forever. Rikers don't need order to run. It needs chaos, controlled chaos. That's what feeds it. The more Andre watched, the clearer it became. The violence wasn't random. It was regulated, a cycle that kept overtime high, kept the public scared, and kept everyone too tired to question why nothing ever changed. Every lockdown meant officers got more hours. Every stabbing meant more security funding. Every broken rule justified another policy that no one enforced. According to federal court documents from Nunez v. City of New York, Rikers officers were paid nearly $250 million in overtime in a single year, much of it tied directly to violent incidents. When fights broke out, they didn't just cost blood. They made money. Andre started to see the island as a living machine, steel, corruption, and desperation fused together. Each part dependent on the others. Remove one, and the whole thing collapses. The gangs played their roles well. They provided order where the officers couldn't. They settled disputes, distributed goods, and punished disobedience faster than any disciplinary board. In return, the COs gave them what they needed: space to operate. It was a system as old as the island itself, one that both sides pretended to hate but secretly relied on. Andre saw it in every exchange. The way guards called Stacks by name, The way confiscated phones always found their way back into the same hands, the way the fights always started when the cameras accidentally shut off. According to the Marshall Project's 2018 expose on Rikers corruption, multiple officers later admitted that using gangs to control violence was a known but unspoken tactic. One former warden described it as outsourcing order. Andre didn't need a report to believe it. He was living it. But the system had cracks, deep ones. Rumors spread of a coming shakeup. City officials were under pressure. Federal monitors were demanding change. Inmates started hearing whispers, "They're gonna shut Rikers down." Most laughed it off. The island had survived lawsuits, scandals, and national outrage before. Every few years, politicians promised reform. Cameras were added, policies were rewritten, and nothing changed. Rico said it best: "They fix the window while the house burns." Still, something was different this time. Journalists were writing more. Federal judges were pushing harder. Even some officers were starting to break silence, leaking evidence to the press. According to the city's investigative reports, internal documents revealed that entire cell blocks were effectively run by gang hierarchies, with staff complicity. The city called it a management failure. The inmates called it truth. One night, a correctional officer Andre had seen around, Sergeant Alvarez, weary and disillusioned, stopped outside his cell. "You smart, Louis?" he asked. Andre didn't answer. "I've been here 22 years, Alvarez continued. "Seen it all. You want to know a secret?" Andre nodded cautiously. "This place ain't broken," Alvarez said. "It works exactly how it's supposed to. You think anyone really wants to fix it? Too many jobs. Too much money. Too many people making a living off your pain." He tapped the bars with his baton and walked away, leaving Andre staring into the dark. In the weeks that followed, violence spiked again. The Bloods and Crips clashed in the yard over a missing shipment. The fight left 3 inmates hospitalized, 1 in critical condition. According to official Department of Correction records from 2019, incidents like this were labeled mutual combat, a bureaucratic term that conveniently erased accountability. To the public, Rikers was just another headline. To Andre, it was hell reheating itself. But something inside him shifted after that night with Alvarez. He began paying attention not to the violence, but to the rhythm behind it. He saw that every fight followed a pattern: a search, a confiscation, a lockdown, then a coincidental release of commissary supplies or contraband. The timing was too precise to be random. It was like someone was conducting chaos from above. "Who runs this island?" Andre asked Rico one night. Rico laughed bitterly. "Whoever's getting paid today." Days turned into months. Andre's court dates were delayed again. His lawyer stopped visiting. The outside world felt like a rumor. Inside, time moved in loops. The same fights, the same lies, the same speeches from politicians who'd never set foot past the gates. But the pressure was building. According to the Department of Justice's Federal Monitor's report in 2020, use of force, staff absenteeism, and inmate deaths were all rising, even after years of promised reforms. Rikers wasn't evolving. It was deteriorating. The machine was beginning to eat itself. Then came the breaking point. One morning, alarms screamed through the corridors. An officer had been stabbed in the GRVC. Inmates said it was revenge. Others said it was a setup, a staged incident to justify another wave of crackdowns and funding increases. The truth was buried, as always, under layers of reports stamped classified. But Andre saw what followed. Officers stormed the tiers, beating anyone in their path. Pepper spray burned the air. Men screamed as they were dragged from their cells. For 3 days, no one left their bunks. Food trays went untouched. The lights never turned off. According to Human Rights Watch's 2021 report on Rikers Island conditions, such retaliatory lockdowns were common, collective punishment disguised as control. When the chaos finally ended, Andre looked around at the cracked walls, the flickering lights, and the faces around him, men who had entered as sons, fathers, brothers, and had become something else entirely, survivors of a system that had no interest in their survival. He whispered to himself, "This ain't a jail. It's a factory. And we're the product." Outside, the city debated closing Rikers. Inside, it kept operating like a machine that couldn't stop even if it wanted to. Because too many hands were turning its gears. Officers, gangs, politicians, unions, contractors, all feeding off the same broken cycle. And for men like Andre, that meant one truth that no reformer wanted to face: you can't fix a system that was never built to heal. The cost of silence. By the time the sun rose over Rikers Island again, the air itself seemed heavier. It wasn't just the fog from the East River, it was the weight of everything that had been building for years. The corruption. The silence. The bodies. Andre Lewis sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the gray wall, tracing a crack that looked like a lightning bolt. Every cell had one, a line that split the paint from the concrete, like the building itself was trying to escape. He'd been on Rikers for nearly 3 years. 3 years without trial. 3 years of lockdowns, riots, and promises of reform that never came. In the beginning, he thought surviving meant staying quiet. But now he understood that silence was part of the trap. That was how Rikers kept running. It fed on fear, and it thrived on people too broken to speak. According to federal oversight reports released in 2020, more than 80% of detainees at Rikers Island were legally innocent, men and women awaiting trial, too poor to post bail, trapped in limbo. For them, Rikers wasn't a sentence. It was a system of waiting without end. Every day, Andre watched men lose themselves in that waiting. Some picked fights just to feel alive. Others stopped talking altogether, their eyes empty, their minds locked in survival mode. The correctional officers weren't much different. Most had been working double shifts for years. Some stopped showing up entirely. Others came to work drunk. The city's Department of Investigation later revealed that nearly 1/3 of all officers were on sick leave during the height of the crisis, leaving dorms unsupervised, forcing inmates to police themselves. Inside those forgotten units, the gangs filled the void again, creating order from chaos, a dark mirror of the city outside. Andre knew that if he didn't get out soon, he'd become part of the same cycle. He'd seen men turn into what they once feared. He'd seen justice twist into a rumor. Then, one night, everything changed. It started with a scream. The kind that cuts through steel. Andre rushed to the bars. Down the corridor, a man lay on the floor, convulsing, a mixture of drugs, stress, and exhaustion. The guards didn't come. They didn't hear, or they didn't care. By morning, the man was gone. Later, Andre learned his name from a kitchen worker, Daryl, 21 years old. Waiting for trial on a minor assault charge. He'd been in solitary for weeks before overdosing on synthetic K2, smuggled in by a guard. The death was ruled accidental. According to Department of Correction reports, over a dozen detainees died that same year under similar circumstances: suicide, overdose, or medical neglect. Each time, the city promised an investigation. Each time, the result was the same line: corrective action has been taken. Something broke inside Andre that day. He couldn't keep waiting for justice that never came. He began writing letters to advocacy groups, lawyers, and journalists whose names he found in old newspapers. At first, nothing happened. Then one morning, a note slipped under his cell door. A single line, handwritten in pencil: "We're listening." He didn't know who it was from, but it gave him something he hadn't felt in years: direction. According to The New Yorker and The City, between 2019 and 2022, a network of inmate whistleblowers began leaking details from inside Rikers. They described the reality most people never saw: guards working with gangs, drugs traded for protection, injuries misclassified to keep statistics low. Some of the evidence, photos, letters, internal memos, made its way to federal prosecutors. The city called it a coordinated misinformation effort, but the truth was too detailed to ignore. One leaked memo from a senior DOC supervisor read, "We are no longer managing a jail. We are managing the aftermath of years of neglect." When Andre was finally called to court in 2021, he almost didn't believe it. He had forgotten what the outside world looked like. The ride over the bridge felt unreal, the skyline shimmering like a different planet. The hearing was brief. The case against him had fallen apart, witnesses recanted, evidence vanished, the DA moved to dismiss. 3 years of his life erased with one sentence: case dismissed. You're free to go. But freedom didn't feel like victory. It felt like waking from a nightmare only to realize you'd been branded by it. As he stepped out of the courthouse, reporters were outside, microphones in hand. One asked, "What's Rikers really like?" Andre hesitated. The city behind them was alive. Taxis honking, people laughing, the world moving as if the island didn't exist. He looked straight at the camera and said, "Rikers isn't a place. It's a wound. You can close it, but you can't heal it." In the years that followed, Andre joined a reentry program that connected former inmates with advocacy groups. He spoke to high school classes, journalists, even a state panel on prison reform. But every time he talked about Rikers, he felt the same thing: disbelief from people who couldn't imagine that such a place existed so close to home. He would tell them about the rotting food, the broken toilets, the rats, the overcrowded dorms, and the guards who traded punishment for profit. He'd quote Human Rights Watch's 2021 report, which called Rikers an ongoing humanitarian crisis. And he'd end with the same sentence every time: justice doesn't live on that island. Only survival does. Meanwhile, the city's promises continued. In 2022, officials reaffirmed plans to close Rikers by 2027, replacing it with smaller borough-based jails. But according to city comptroller audits, costs kept rising, nearly $500,000 per inmate per year, even as conditions worsened. By 2024, over 40 detainees had died since the reforms began. Each one sparked outrage. Each one faded into silence. The island endured, not because it was strong, but because it was useful. It absorbed the failures no one wanted to see. As one former warden told New York One News, "Every time we say never again, Rikers proves we don't mean it." Andre returned once, years later, as part of a documentary crew filming the facility from across the river. The skyline of Manhattan glowed behind it, glittering like a lie. The island sat still, wrapped in fog, the sound of distant sirens echoing faintly. He stared at the razor wire, the floodlights, the ferry making its slow trip across the water, and thought of all the men still trapped inside, waiting for courts that never called, guards that never came, and a system that never cared. He whispered to himself, "Some prisons are made of concrete. Others are made of silence." And in that silence, Rikers Island kept breathing, a living monument to everything America pretends not to see.